From every corner of the imagination, these are the Boundless Chronicles with Tracy Turner.
There was indeed something very odd about Isaiah's death. Very odd indeed, sighed the melancholy gentleman in the back of the carriage. It was the groundskeeper's father who had up until now kept quiet. "And just what may have that been?" asked Mr. Leonard. Well, Isaiah, as you may or may not be aware, was a rather curious, quiet man. You could always feel his presence when he was near, even without seeing him. There was a certain hazy feeling in the air, kind of like a cellar door open right near your shoulder. Well, one particular Sabbath, at a time when he was in very good health to all practical appearances, the church bell stopped ringing just all of a sudden. The sexton, who was telling me this, said he had never known this bell to get that heavy in his hand in all of his years of taking care of it. It was as if it was needing oiling. This, of course, was on a Sunday, as I said. Well, sir, during the week following, it chanced that Isaiah's wife was up at a late hour one evening to complete her ironing. She was doing the washing for Mr. and Mrs. Swim. Her husband had just had his supper, and went to bed as usual, as he did an hour or two before she did. While she was ironing, she heard him coming down the stairs. He paused briefly to put on his boots at the foot of the stairs, right where he'd always left them, and then came on to the den where she was doing her ironing, passing by her towards the door, this being the only way from the staircase to the outside of the house. He spoke not a word, and neither did his wife. Isaiah, of course, was not a man of many words anyway, and his wife, being occupied with her ironing, never gave it much thought. He went on outside and closed the door behind him. Now, Isaiah had done this a few times prior, when he wasn't feeling his best or for want of a pipeful of tobacco, so his wife thought nothing strange of this. She finished up her ironing shortly thereafter, and put away the ironing board, and went about preparing the table for his breakfast the next morning. Still, Isaiah did not return. His wife supposed him to be not too far off and went on to bed herself. Worn out as she was, she left the door unlocked and climbed the stairs. After scribbling on the back of the door with a piece of chalk, "Mind and do the door," because Isaiah was such a forgetful man. Well now, to her great surprise, and I might say alarm, upon reaching the foot of the stairs, lo and behold, his boots were sitting there, just as they always were when he had retired for the evening. Continuing on to their sleeping chamber, she was more alarmed to see him in bed, sleeping sound as a rock. How, she thought, could he have possibly gotten back into the house without her seeing or hearing him? It was totally beyond her comprehension. It could only have been by passing behind her quietly while she was ironing. This notion did nothing to satisfy her, for it was surely impossible that she would not have heard him come through in such a small room. Try as she might to unravel the mystery, and feeling very queer and uncomfortable about it, she decided not to disturb her husband or to question him, and went off to bed herself. He arose the next morning and prepared for work early, before she was awake, and she waited his return to breakfast with a great deal of anxiety for want of an explanation, you see. Thinking the matter over by daylight made it seem all the more startling to her. Finally, when he came into the meal before she had the opportunity to question him, he said, "What's the meaning of those words chalked on the door?" She told him and inquired of his leaving the house the night before. Isaiah declared outright that he'd ne'er left the bedroom once and entered it that night, having in fact laid down and fell directly asleep, not once waking until the clock struck 6. And he rose to go about his labor. Now Mary Turner was as certain in her mind that he in fact did leave the house as she was of her own existence, and was not so sure he had returned. This was quite disturbing to her, and she did not argue the point with him and let the subject drop, thinking she must have been mistaken. Later, while she was strolling down Blair Street in the day, she met up with Ben Shepherd's daughter Ethel, and said, "Well, Ethel, you look a little sleepy today." "Yes, Miss Turner," said Ethel. "Now please don't tell anyone, but I don't mind letting you know what the reason for it is. Last night, being Old Midsummer's Eve, a few of us parishioners didn't get home till near 1 o'clock. "Indeed," says Mrs. Turner. "Old Midsummer, was it, yesterday? I declare, I had so much work to do I never gave thought to Midsummer or Michaelmas. Yes, and let me tell you, we were frightened enough by what we saw, too. You might not recall, sir, having gone off to foreign parts so young that on Midsummer's night it's believed in these parts that the faint shapes of all the folk in the parish who would be going to death's door within a year can be seen entering the church. Those who recover their illnesses will come out again after a while. Them that are doomed to die do not return." "Well, do tell, what did you see?" asked Isaiah's wife. "Well," says Ethel, dropping her head, "we should not be telling you what we saw, or rather who we saw." "You saw my husband, didn't you?" said Mary Turner in a quiet manner. "Well, since you put it so," says Ethel, "we thought we could almost swear it was him. But it was dark, and we were a bit frightened, and of course it might not have been he." "Ethel, you shouldn't mind letting it out, though. 'Tis kept back in kindness. And I know he didn't come back out of the church, did he? For I know it as well as you." Ethel did not provide an answer to that inquiry, and no more was said of the matter. However, 3 days later, Isaiah Turner was mowing with Ira Eldridge in Mr. Hansford's meadow. In the heat of that scorching day, they sat down for a morsel neath a willow tree and emptied their flagon. A little while after, both of them fell asleep as they sat there. Ira was the first to awake, and as he looked over at his fellow mower, he saw one of those great white miller's souls, as Granddad used to call them, that is to say, a miller moth, come from Isaiah's open mouth whilst he slept, and fly straight away. Ira thought it odd, as Isaiah had worked in a mill for several years as a lad. He then gandered at the day's sun and knew soon enough that he had slept a good long time, and as Isaiah did not wake, Ira called out to him and said it was high time they started back to work. He took no notice, and when he went to shake him to wake him up, he discovered Isaiah was dead. Now just happened that very day, Paul Johnson was down at Cold Springs dipping up a pitcher full of water, and as he turned away, who should he see coming down to the spring on the other side of the creek but Isaiah, looking very sickly and old. Paul Johnson was surprised, for several years back Isaiah's only child, their son, had been drowned in that spring while he was playing there. And this had bared on Isaiah's mind so much that he would not go near the place, and was known to go upwards of a half a mile out of his way just to avoid it. Now there ain't a way in the whole world that Isaiah could have been at that spring and body, because this happened near about the time that Ira had found him dead under the willow tree. "Well, I dare say that is one melancholy story," observed the immigrant, after a moment's silence. Yes, yes. Well, we must take the ups and downs together," said the groundskeeper's father.
From the edge of the imagination, you've been listening to Appalachian storyteller and author Tracy Turner.